informative manual, right? To say, hey, this is the protocols. These are the protocols rather for this. The constraints are lack of information, panic. There's all kinds of things. So that would be election. What needs to be done soon with a midterm election?
You have to jump on with every government that's done wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Why? Whom are you trying to? Who's your target demographic?
The electorate.
Yeah. What do they like? What do voters like at midterm elections?
They like to be able to.
Empty promises?
They like to be able to badmouth the opposing candidate over dinner. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and then when it comes time to vote, they say, we'll wait for the presidential election. Yeah. So one of the constraints could be apathy because one of the complaints from the GOP and the Democrats is, we can't keep people out at midterm elections. Nobody cares. It's almost, because I only care about the president. Who cares who's in the House? Who cares who's in the Senate? They don't do anything. Actually, that's true right now. Ooh, bad example. Okay. So with any of these, you would want to look at those kinds of things. Then, well, wait, before we get off onto that, what are you doing your analysis on? Yes.
It's on a paper.
What's that?
Scientific paper.
About?
It is about enantioselective catalysis by artificial metalloenzymes in which you use a ruthenium catalyst in a two-chair complex and the scaffold of the protein to achieve the enantioselective reductive amination of a particular compound.
Halfway through, I realized you were doing it on purpose.
But that's it.
What are you doing yours on? Would you do me a big favor and translate that into me?
It's just like, it's a paper that someone published.
No, okay. Somewhere in between what you said before and what you just said. I'm kind of in the middle. It's something, you're doing something with something.
So you have an enzyme.
An enzyme. I know what an enzyme is.
And then you stick, a catalyst, like
Yes.
a metal catalyst. And
Yes,
you stick
they
it in the
purr.
pocket of the
Yeah.
enzyme such that the shape of the enzyme specifies what goes in, but you have the catalytic properties of the metal itself.
Okay.
But I wanted to do the rhetoric analysis on scientific jargon itself.
Okay, great. Which is why you... Whew. I lost more hair. Excellent. So what is your focus on this particular... What are you going to analyze? What are you going to focus on?
It's more like the historical nature of the terms that are used. For example, like where things come from, and
Oh,
so
okay.
like the history that how the language of the paper is constrained by past scientists who used to make the names for things based on things like histidine,
Yeah.
which is like an amino acid, which means like from the tissue something, or like the complex itself, it's like a piano stool complex. It's like, why the hell is it called a piano stool complex?
By the way, my sister's an ornithologist, and it always blows me away when they use Latin binomial names for things, or if, for instance, you find out this, pachyderm, you think, oh, elephant. That must mean long nose, or big ears, or tusks. It means thick skin. Really? That's the Linnaeus understanding? Boy, that thing looks like it has thick skin. Yeah, where do these things come from, and who came? And it's almost arbitrary. You're just using something that was, taxonomically applied. Excellent. So, what would be the exigency in this case? Why was this done? Gesundheit.
So the paper,
Why did the paper need to be written?
I mean, it's so it's like a new technology.
Mm-hmm.
Why was it published then? It was probably like usual in science, they want to publish before the other person publishes.
Right.
it.
Same kind of thing. So there's a lot of the things of the DNA article, but we found something new. It's new technology. It's something that we're figuring out. And clearly for professionals, because it was very jargon heavy. And one of the things you might want to do is look at it in terms of, okay, here's my focus. I want to look at the jargon, how historic. By the way, it's the great focus is the historical reasons for the jargon and why we're using that. Now, what kind of methodology are you going to use for your analysis?
So I'm going to, so first is like the paper itself, then I need to see like the previous papers that
Yeah.
came before it, like not so far ago, and then I want to see also like etymology-wise.
Excellent, excellent. And by the way, what he's doing is a wonderful segue, by the way. Thank you. I couldn't have paid you to do that. Now we'll go over here. He's going to look at the text and the context. So he's going to look at the jargon, the language, in this case, of the text. If I were to do, for example, let me jump around a little bit, the DNA article, I might say, Watson and Crick use, as we talked about, active voice when they're talking about their own research, but passive voice when they're talking about Pauling or anybody else, right? And what we're going to do here is look at jargon, right? And in a sense, we're focused on that, but we're going to need to go to context or outside texts, outside references, to look at etymology. Remind me after class, I'll give you a good website for etymology. That's actually, it's not purely scientific, but it's a very scholarly source for looking at Latin and Greek-based roots and things, so it might be helpful. When was this published?
2013.
Okay, so actually not that long ago, even for science. So the Kyros is interesting. We might want to examine that. And when you can examine something about a paper that has nothing to do with the paper, you could only look, for instance, with the DNA article, you could write specifically about Rosalind Franklin, who's never mentioned. That's another thing you want to look at. What is not mentioned? What's floating around outside of the paper? What's in the area that's sort of in the environment that's in between the spaces. So she's not even mentioned in the paper. I may want to write specifically about her. I might want to write about etymologies. They're not going to explain etymologies of the jargon within the paper. They're talking about the experiment itself, and you're interested in the language. Excellent. Very good. Very good. How many people have references? Have been finding references for their... Like that's about 2.5. This was a half. What are you finding?
I just found a couple of random ones. I haven't really looked for a full
Okay.
list of references, but the ones that I have found I've written down.
Okay. Keep in mind that regardless if you use an etymology dictionary or if you use something that you're going to do a comparison contrast of, or if you use the annotations to the DNA article, those are all references. So anything that you examine or look at is a reference. Okay, that'll inform and help you write it. And the reason I'm having you do this, by the way, is I've had students come in and say, I can't get 5 pages out of this thing. No, if you're just looking at the document, it's going to be hard. But if you inform the document with other documents, whether it's reviews, history, biography, who are Watson and Crick? Well, where do they fit into society? Who was Rosalind Franklin? Is it still, by the way, how the DNA article fares in terms of freshness date? Is it still a relevant paper? Yeah. So far, it's still pretty important, and it's a landmark historical paper. But it's been sort of informed by other things, including time and yeah.
So for my rhetorical analysis, I'm looking at 2 NFL commercials.
Okay.
And one of them is commemorating 9/11, and then another one is Bob Dylan being like, "Yay, cars made in America."
Yep.
So for my outside sources, could I use one that's like the history of 9/11 and then like a biography of Bob Dylan?
Yeah. Yeah. In
So
fact.
I've been really struggling trying.
Okay, let me give you some ideas then. So the need to show a Super Bowl commercial is to sell people on something in a 30-second multi-million-dollar spot with everything they've got. And so considering the demographic profile, they're probably not going to get into a lot of details about the car. They're probably going to really push pathos. So for 9/11, it's like, patriotism. Same thing for the Bob Dylan one, only it's Bob Dylan. So he brings an ethos to it, but a problematic ethos, because if you look at Bob Dylan now and little Bobby Zimmerman of the 60s, you're going to find that a lot of people consider the fact that he sold out because he was, he wasn't shilling cars back in the 60s. He was, doing something else. So it's kind of interesting. A lot of people have considered him to be a total hypocrite, and that might be interesting because his ethos can be damaged by the Kyros, by the time, because back then and now, and you'll see this with a lot of, the rockers and the folk singers of the 60s, and then they grow up. and they're not mad anymore. And when you're not mad anymore, you don't have that edge. It's hard to have an edge when you have a mortgage, right? He probably doesn't have a mortgage. But the point being that, yeah, you could see what were people's reactions to those. And by the way, this sounds funny, even comments under an article that you read in the news, that's some of my favorite stuff, because when I was growing up, we read the newspaper and there were letters to the editor. Now you read it online and there's this incredible battle going on between trolls and people who are trying to seriously comment on the thing, and it's wonderful. It's sort of like an intellectual cage fight in the mud. With people who say things, I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know that Ebola was Obama's fault. I had no idea. No, I'm amazed. I'm going down like, yeah, typical Obama. Wow, oh, because he's from Africa. I forgot. Yeah. He brought it over, clearly.
See, I'm a little bit leery of using YouTube comments, though, because they're notoriously terrible.
But consider this, and this is something I find interesting. Sometimes you'll find the tenor or the environment and the atmosphere of what's going on by some of the comments. Sometimes, and this is what I find fascinating, sometimes the comments are so much better written than the article. I've been reading the Huffington Post and I remember thinking, this is horribly written. And then someone will say, this is a poorly written article that is trying to say this, and we'll do this wonderful essay. They're like anti-trolls. They go in there and fix the article. And it's fascinating. But no, you can use them, but keep in mind, for instance, let's talk about ethos for a minute. If I'm doing my analysis on tabloid journalism, let's say something from the, they don't have the...
BuzzFeed.
Is BuzzFeed one? Because, see, I grew up with Weekly World News, which was...
We still have it.
Do we still have it?
I love looking at it.
40-foot statue of Elvis found on Mars. Bigfoot tells scientists how to travel the speed of light through sign language. He does.
Apparently.
Yeah, yeah. Or the BuzzFeed, or what was the one they have when you're in the supermarket, the Inquiring Minds Want to Know, in National Enquirer. Couldn't think of the name of it. So let's say I'm doing my analysis of one of those. Well, it sounds funny, but I probably will use other tabloid articles as outside sources. Are they credible? Well, they are if I'm looking at tabloid news, if that's what my analysis is of. So yeah, consider that. I mean, I'm fine with that, and I think sometimes you can, it's a little like going slumming, but it's amazing what you'll find. Good. Okay, so does this make sense? You know, you need to sort of figure out what was the need for this, and if you're doing your introduction, what created a need for this, whom is it written for, and what constraints are there? You know, what people, situations, or things might get in the way of this thing getting clear. This is similar to noise, signal to noise ratio. Excellent. Any questions about that? I just kind of wanted to, we didn't really discuss I talk about it in the book, but we didn't discuss the rhetorical situation too much. Fairly happy? Good. Everybody has a midterm face. Okay. Which you'll have until the 10th week. Midterm, 10th week. It makes perfect sense. All right.
I had a midterm on the Friday, and then the final for that class was on Monday. So I was like, seriously, like what?
Let's just put them together. Let's make it cumulative at that point. Yeah, did you notice you didn't have any quiz last week?
Yes.
We already mentioned this.
I know, I thought I'd mention it again.
He feels very bad.
I do. I feel like I've done something very altruistic. Through laziness, but still. Can altruism be a product of sloth?
Yeah.
No.
If it is altruism.
No. That's your claim. What's your support?
I'd want to look at the definition of altruism and where that word comes from, but I'm pretty sure there's some effort implied.
Yeah, or at least intent.
Yeah.
And to have intent, you actually have to have some motivation.
Well, his intent was to be lazy, so.
But the intent wasn't to be generous.
No, but it was an artifact. It was a secondary metabolite of my okay, never mind. See, you can do it. If I try to sound fancy and scientific, then I know Indira will rush in here and say, shut up, like she does every time we teach.
All the ALS, right?
She does, though. She does it when we teach the intro to thesis class. She says, don't do that. Don't try to sound smart. So I won't try to sound smart. Instead, we're going to go over logical fallacies. And these are fun when you find them in their natural habitat, which may be the article you're looking at the moment. What's equivocation? Yeah, and a lot of times in the non-fallacious context, equivocation can mean euphemism, it can be jargon, it can be slang. Those are not necessarily fallacies in and of themselves. And whenever we talk about fallacies, the onus is on the person calling it a fallacy or identifying it as a fallacy to prove that it's a fallacy.